Welcome to AskPsychSessions with Marianne Lloyd, where we ask some of the best teachers we know questions from you, our audience. If you have a question or an idea for a conversation, please visit bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. That's bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. All one word, all lowercase. And here's our next question.
Thanks for joining us. My guest today is Dr. Cristina Zepeda, who is joining us from Washington University in St. Louis. Thanks for being here today, Cristina.
Thanks so much for the invite.
So before I get to the topic of interest, which if people like an early preview is motivation, can you tell us a little bit about your professional background, your research area, your teaching experience, please?
Sure. Well, as you said, I'm Cristina Zepeda. I'm a postdoctoral research associate, and I study, I guess more generally, how students learn, but I focus really on how students regulate their learning in terms of both how they cognitively and are motivationally in control of their learning. So I look at those two complements in my research. So things like students' metacognition and the cognitive learning strategies they use, as well as the more motivation side, so their motivational beliefs and goals, and more recently, their motivational strategies they use to navigate their learning and maintain their motivation. In terms of my teaching background, I've always been pretty focused on learning, so a lot of my research applies to my teaching, and I've taught research methods at the college level, student cognitive psychology, as well as an introduction to learning sciences course here at WashU. And, as a postdoc, I'm not currently teaching, but I'm looking forward to getting back into the classroom and working with students.
Great, thank you. Let's jump right into that. So
Sure.
It sounds like, and I brought this up, careful listeners might notice that I've had this insight before, that you can talk about the testing effect as much as you want, but if people don't do it, it's not going to do them any good. So Exactly. Is that the kind of work that you do? And can you give us maybe some specific details about what you found and maybe also how you've been able to use this in the classroom?
Yeah. So, I'm going to talk about my dissertation. So part of my dissertation was looking at what strategies do students think they use before an exam. So right before an exam, they would answer a question, please describe your study techniques in a paragraph or two. And then we went through and coded all their responses, and they were all different flavors of types of learning strategies they would use. It would be very specific, like I would sit at my desk, play music. They had a routine that they would do. But what our goal was to try to code those cognitive learning strategies, like the testing effect in terms of self-testing themselves, as well as comparison and, checking to see what they knew and didn't know to get that monitoring aspect. And we find that about 50% of the students use some sort of self-testing, at least in their open-ended responses. And about the same amount, actually a little more, uses monitoring in some fashion. So they could be explaining the things that they don't know. And we're really surprised to actually see that so many students, 50% were using these strategies that we want them to use on their own without being we don't have and in that course, we didn't have like an instruction to use certain learning strategies. They were just doing this on their own. And the students that were doing those strategies were performing better on the exams, which is what we would expect. And it's nice to see that things that take place in the laboratory and with more experimental designs were also occurring in these more observational, regular practices in the classroom. But the question that you're bringing up is, well, how do we get that other 50% to use these more constructive, generative strategies? And so that's something that my PI advisor, Andy Butler, and I have been really thinking through, and we wrote a JARMAC article on how students can motivate them, or how instructional teachers as well as students can use, psychological motivational research. And instead of applying it to a domain like it's traditionally been done, how do you apply it to something like retrieval practice, which creates that, desirable difficulty. It's not fun to use necessarily. It creates disfluency, but yet it leads to that desirable outcome of actually learning and gaining more robust knowledge. So, in that paper, I think we explore 5 different types of motivational supports that can be done in the classroom. Things, Mark McDaniel and Gil, I think it's Einstein is his last name, have a really nice framework where they talk about how to support students, from all these different levels and using a cognitive learning strategy. And then there's, appropriate challenge. You don't want the task to, the retrieval practice to be too difficult or too easy. It needs to be this nice middle ground in order to keep students to continue wanting to learn about that new strategy. I won't go into all the details of that paper, but basically thinking about these psychological interventions that have shown to work and trying to frame it to students' learning strategies. But I think something that's really important is that students use different learning strategies across different domains or courses. So it's really informative to kind of get this baseline of what are students doing in my course, and then how can I get them to move the needle on the strategies that would benefit their learning in this course. A lot of people always focus on retrieval practice, but there are other strategies that might be more important. Or, retrieval practice takes many different flavors across the courses. And so trying to think, more creatively and the different aspects of retrieval practice in a course.
Great. Thank you. That gives me some starting points. You used another word in your introduction that I think is probably pretty relevant as well, which is metacognition.
Mm-hmm.
So I assume one needs to have better metacognition to both be a more effective learner and to be more effective at kind of monitoring motivation. Can you just talk a bit about the role of metacognition in all this, please?
So there's I don't know how theory we want to get all with all this stuff, but there is this theory by Dave Mealy and Abigail Scholler called metamotivation. So it's basically taking some of the aspects of metacognition and the idea that we have metacognitive knowledge and metacognitive awareness, so we're aware of our thoughts and we can control those thoughts, and then applying that to students' motivation. Are they aware of those thoughts, and how do they control them? And that control piece is something that I've been really looking into, is what types of strategies do students do on their own? I'm very about what is happening in this context in order to inform what we do. And students use a whole host of different types of motivational strategies, some that are beneficial, some that aren't so beneficial. And it's really interesting that it's an area of research that hasn't received much attention in the motivational space. And so, Andy and I have been working on this paper that is under review, and we're looking forward to seeing what reviewers think. But we look at the 5 different types. I think I like the number 5. 5 different types of motivational strategies that they use. So there are some that are self-talk. So things like mastery approach self-talk. So I remind myself that I want to learn for the sake of learning. Performance self-talk. I remind myself that I want to learn to get that good grade, which might be more common and salient, and is more common in terms of what students say and the frequency that students say they use that strategy. And as well as we created a new one, which was utility value self-talk. So reminding themselves that, they need to do well so they can get that good grade. So they can get that career or that job that they want to do. And then there's 3 more or I guess we looked at 6. There are 3 more. I'm thinking of my graph that we referred to is proximal goals. So taking the larger task and breaking it down into smaller pieces so that it feels more accomplishable and you can see that you're making progress. Then there is self-consequating. So I have to do my homework before I can watch my Netflix show, or, you have to do something in order to get that reward. And then the last one is, proximal goals. Interest enhancement. So you make the task more fun and interesting in order to get yourself to engage in that task and to put forth more effort. And these all take, they can co-occur, but the most common one, as I said, is performance approach goals. But the ones that tend to be related to better learning outcomes are the mastery approach self-talk and that utility value self-talk. And so that's something that, this utility value seems to be a reoccurring theme that students are using this strategy. Mark McDaniel's framework emphasizes utility value. And so that's something that we're starting to look at is if we have a utility value intervention in the classroom, does that affect the types of strategies that students use in the classroom to get a better idea of how these things are actually happening in the messy world of the classroom where there's all these contextual features changing?
So great. You started to answer my next question, which was going to be, are we really explicit about things like what the utility is, or do we encourage students to self-discover on their own? Does that maybe depend on what I'm trying to get them to do? Do you have thoughts about that? How would you ideally intervene?
Right. So the utility value intervention work is, a lot of it's done by Judy Harakovich's group in Wisconsin. And what they do is they have students write a 500 to 600 words where they relate the content of the course to their lives to get that relatedness aspect of utility value. And so they have the students do it. I can't remember. I think it matters. It might be a larger effect if the students do it versus you telling them, because they're constructing and generating, if we're thinking from a cognitive perspective of the intervention. And I know that the 500 to 600 word tends to be, you need to give them the word limit so that they go far enough in terms of what they generate.
Thank you. Those are good ideas that I should think about implementing, especially since I teach research methods and I talk about how important it is, but I don't really go that next step to ask them to explicitly reflect on it. So thank you for that good idea.
Yeah, sure.
We are getting close to our usual 15 minutes, but I always like guests to be able to talk about something they want to talk about. I assume you're motivated by motivation.
Yeah.
But do you have a favorite finding, something that you're working on, something not related to this that you'd like faculty to think about when they're teaching?
Yeah, I think it can be really challenging to know, there's a world that studies these cognitive learning strategies and a world that studies motivation, and finding that bridge and thinking about how they can connect is something that's really challenging because those people publish in different places, and where do you get that information from? But I do think it's something that people are starting to push more forward and are attending different conferences to exchange ideas. But we're always looking for people to collaborate with to do this stuff in real world classrooms. And so I think that's something that, maybe not as teachers or instructors may not know, that like if you want to do something in your classroom, we always welcome people reaching out and asking questions. And, if you want to collaborate, we always love coming up with new collaborations, pending time and effort and all that other aspects of doing research. But even at your local institutions, there's probably someone there that may do similar work. And it doesn't hurt to say hello and get a conversation going, although it can be, you're not sure how it'll turn out. But
I like that. As someone who likes to meet new people, I think that's a great idea. So if people wanted to reach out to you, should they find your WashU email online? I believe you can be found on the Twitter.
Yes,
if you want to share your
use
handle.
Twitter, although my Twitter handle isn't my name. It's Si Se Puede, which means CZ can, using the Spanish flair of my family. But yeah, Twitter, email's perfectly fine. Happy to answer any questions or point people in a direction as well. And I think a nice place to start might be the JARMAC article that Andy and Rachel Martin, who's a grad student, and I wrote, in terms of just thinking of all the different dimensions of motivation, because there are so many, and we just cover a few of them.
Well, great. Thank you so much for your time and ideas.
Yeah.
And here's to more motivated students. And again, I've been chatting with Cristina Zepeda from the Washington University in St. Louis. Thank you, Dr. Zepeda. Take care.
Thank you.